All right, let's just jump right in. What if I told you one of the most dangerous books in the New Testament was actually a letter? Not dangerous because of swords or battles, but because of an idea. An idea so radical it was like a spiritual and theological bombshell for its first readers. We're talking, of course, about the book of Hebrews.
I mean, that's really the heart of it. Imagine you've been following the same story your whole life. You know the rules, the characters, everything. And then someone hands you a letter that says, you know that thing you thought was the main event? It was just the trailer. That's what Hebrews does. It argues that the entire beautiful system of ancient Judaism, the temple, the priests, the sacrifices, was all just a preview for the real thing.
So, here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll look at the urgent warning that this letter represented. Then, we'll dive into this core idea of the ultimate upgrade. We'll talk about a priest like no other and the final sacrifice. Then, we have to wrestle with some of the tough stuff in the text before we get to the incredible finale, the Hall of Faith.
Okay, first up, a letter of warning. To really get this book, you have to put yourself in their shoes. Picture this. It's sometime around the year 60 AD. The magnificent temple in Jerusalem is still standing. It is the center of the universe for Jewish life. But for a small group of Jewish people who've started following Jesus, their entire world is starting to come apart at the seams.
I mean, really think about what they were dealing with. The temple, it's right there. It's glorious. You can see the smoke from the sacrifices rising every single day, just like it had for generations. But you've chosen a different path. And because of that, your family and your friends are pressuring you, maybe even shunning you. You're facing persecution, maybe even ending up in prison. And some people in your community are starting to waver. They're drifting away, thinking about going back to what felt safe and familiar.
So can you feel the question that's just hanging in the air? It's this gnawing doubt. Did we make a huge mistake? I mean, why are we suffering so much for this crucified carpenter from Nazareth when the beautiful God-given system of our ancestors is still operating right over there? The temptation to just give up, go back, and make the pain stop must have been immense.
And right into the middle of this crisis, someone writes them a letter. We have no idea who it was. Seriously, it's anonymous. But whoever they were an absolute genius. They write this spiritual and intellectual tour de force to answer that one nagging question, and their answer is a resounding no. Going back is not an option, because what you have in Jesus isn't just a new feature, it's the total fulfillment of everything you've ever known.
Which brings us to the core of the letter, the ultimate upgrade. The author is basically going to lay out a series of powerful comparisons to prove, point by point, why Jesus is superior to everything that came before. And he starts big, really big.
And if you were reading this in the original Greek, one word would just jump off the page at you again and again. It's the word kreitton. It shows up 12 times and it means better, superior, more excellent. This is the whole argument in one word. Jesus brings a better hope, a better covenant, better promises. It's like the universe's most important software update notification.
So where does he start this comparison? With angels. Now you might be thinking angels, why them? Well, in first century Jewish thought, angels were a huge deal. The tradition was that the law itself, the Torah given to Moses, was delivered by angels. They were God's divine couriers. But the author of Hebrews draws a sharp line in the sand. He says, look, angels are messengers, they're servants. But the Son? He's the very radiance of God's glory. Angels delivered a message. Jesus is the message.
And this sets up the author's first major warning. The logic is just devastatingly simple. He basically asks, look, if Israel was called to pay serious attention to the law that was delivered by angels, how much more should we pay attention to the message that came from the Son of God himself? It's a mic drop moment. The greater the messenger, the greater the message. You can't just ignore this one.
Okay, so Jesus is superior to angels. But what about the giant of giants, Moses? You can't get bigger than Moses in Judaism. But even here, the author makes this brilliant distinction. He says Moses was a faithful servant in God's house. He was part of the system. But Jesus? He's the son over God's house. He's not just in the house, he built the house. Moses led people to a physical land, a temporary rest. Jesus leads people to an eternal rest.
All right, now we're getting to the absolute core of the argument, a priest like no other. See, in that world, with the temple still operating, the priests were everything. They were the go-betweens, the mediators between regular people and a holy God. They ran the whole show. And the author of Hebrews is about to take that entire concept and turn it completely on its head. The key title here is Archiereus, the high priest.
And when the author calls Jesus our high priest, he's not just giving him an honorary title. No, he's claiming that Jesus fulfills this role in a way that the entire Levitical priesthood was only ever a shadow of.
And just look at the comparison. The priests of Aaron, they were flawed, sinful human beings. They had to offer sacrifices for their own sins before they could even help anyone else. And of course, they were mortal. They died. Their work was temporary. But Jesus, he's morally flawless. He has no sin of his own to atone for, and he's eternal. His priesthood lasts forever. But then there's the killer detail. Jesus wasn't from the priestly tribe of Levi.
You can just feel the readers pausing and going, but wait, who on earth is Melchizedek? This is where the author pulls out a character from the deep cuts of the Old Testament, a name that's easy to just read past. But it turns out this mysterious figure is the key to the whole argument.
So here's the deal with Melchizedek. He pops up way back in Genesis 14. He's this mysterious priest-king of ancient Jerusalem. This is centuries before Aaron and the official priesthood even existed. And get this, Abraham, the father of the Jewish people, pays tithes to him. That shows how great he was. His priesthood wasn't based on genealogy, it was something totally different. The author points to him and to a prophecy in Psalm 110 as proof that God had a plan for a superior, eternal priesthood all along.
So, we have a better priest from a better order. What does that lead to? A better sacrifice. This is the absolute peak of the mountain, the climax of the whole argument, the final sacrifice.
To feel the weight of what's coming, you have to understand the old way. It was a system of endless repetition. The ancient historian Josephus tells us that for a single Passover celebration, something like 250,000 lambs might be sacrificed, 250,000, for one holiday.
And here's a wild historical fact. The drainage systems in first century Jerusalem were literally engineered to handle the massive amounts of blood flowing from the temple. I mean, it was a constant physical, visceral reality. The flow of blood never, ever stopped. It was a system that was always running. And into that world of never-ending repetition, the author drops a bombshell of a word, epipox. It means once for all. He repeats it over and over. What Jesus did wasn't just another sacrifice in the queue. It was the one, the final one, the sacrifice to end all sacrifices. In a culture built on repeat rituals, this idea was nothing short of unthinkable.
And here's the shocking part. The author argues that all those hundreds of thousands of sacrifices never actually permanently dealt with sin. They acted like a temporary decontamination protocol. They cleaned things up for a little while, but the problem always came back. They were a constant reminder that sin was still there. But Jesus' sacrifice? That wasn't a temporary fix. That was the permanent cure. Forgiveness, once and for all. Okay, so the author has built this incredible, airtight case for why Jesus is the ultimate upgrade. And then he pivots hard. He turns to his readers and says, so what are you going to do about it? And this is where we get into some of the most dangerous and honestly most debated warning passages in the whole Bible.
Because these passages lead directly to a really uncomfortable question, one that people have argued about for centuries. Can a person actually lose their salvation? It's a question that comes right out of the pages of Hebrews.
Just listen to this verse from Hebrews chapter 6. It says, "For it is impossible, in the case of those who have once been enlightened, and then have fallen away, to restore them again to repentance." Whoa, impossible. That sounds terrifyingly final. What in the world is he talking about?
But here's why context is everything. The author isn't trying to write a systematic theology textbook here. This isn't a philosophical puzzle. This is a pastor with his heart on his sleeve, pleading with people he loves. He sees them standing on the edge of a spiritual cliff, about to drift away, and he's shouting a warning to pull them back from the brink. The ultimate warning really boils down to this. If Jesus' sacrifice is the only sacrifice that can truly deal with sin, and you reject it, what's your plan B? What other sacrifice is left? It's not about stumbling or having doubts. It's about looking at the one and only solution and willfully walking away. There's simply nowhere else to go.
But this letter does not end with a warning. After shaking them awake, the author does something beautiful. He lifts their heads and points them to the horizon, to a great gallery of heroes who show them how to endure. Welcome to the Hall of Faith.
And in chapter 11, he just builds this incredible rhythm. By faith, Abraham obeyed, leaving everything he knew to look for a city he couldn't see. By faith, Moses chose mistreatment with God's people over all the treasures of Egypt. By faith, Rahab welcomed the spies and was saved.
He goes on and on, building this powerful case that they are not alone. They are part of a long, heroic story of faith.
But here's the kicker, the part we often miss. Crucially, many of these heroes died without receiving what was promised. Let that sink in. Their faith wasn't a guarantee of seeing the final results in their lifetime. Faith, for them, wasn't about immediate gratification. It was about trusting the one who made the promise, even when the finish line was out of sight.
So let's land the plane. What's the key takeaway from this whole incredible book? It's this: Jesus is the reality that all the shadows of the Old Testament were pointing toward. His work as our high priest and his final sacrifice gives us direct, confident access to God. It's not once a year behind a curtain, it's once for all. So the takeaway for us? Simple. Don't drift. Persevere. Keep your eyes fixed on Jesus, inspired by the crowd of faithful heroes who have run the race before you.
And that brings the challenge of this ancient letter right into our lives today. Its first readers were tempted to go back to the shadow of the temple and its rituals. So the question for you and me is this: if this letter is right, what shadow are you still holding on to? What religious system, what temporary comfort, what lesser thing are you clinging to when the reality, Jesus himself, is available right now?